The valley had been silent for so long that even the wind seemed to hesitate before passing through it, as if afraid to disturb the grief that had settled there like a living thing, heavy and unyielding, pressing into the earth, into the stones, into the hollow remains of what had once been a thriving domain, and at the heart of it all, resting upon a rise of blackened rock that overlooked the empty expanse, lay the Dragon Queen, her immense form curled around nothing, her wings drawn close knot. In rest but in withdrawal, her once radiant scales dulled by ash and time, and her eyes, when they opened, carried a depth of sorrow so vast that it seemed to darken the very air around her. She had not always been alone. Once, this valley had echoed with life, with the calls of her kin, with the thunder of wings cutting through the sky, with the crackling energy of a thriving brood that had filled the mountains with warmth and presence. But that was before the war, before the skies had burned and the ground had split under the force of weapons not meant for this world, before the invaders had come not with hunger or instinct, but with cold, calculated purpose. They had not come to fight. They had come to erase. And they had succeeded. Every nest destroyed. Every voice silenced. Every trace of her kind reduced to ruin. All except one. Her, the Queen. Left alive not by mercy, but by accident. Or perhaps by something worse. A survivor. A witness. A memory that could not forget. Days had turned into weeks. Weeks into years. Years into something that no longer needed to be counted, because time had lost its meaning in a place where nothing changed, where nothing grew, where even the sky seemed to carry the same dull shade of gray that never quite lifted, and the Queen had remained where she had fallen at the end of it all, her body healing in the slow, stubborn way of ancient creatures, but her spirit had not followed. She did not hunt. She did not fly. She did not rule. She simply remained, watching, remembering, grieving, and so the valley stayed silent. Until the day it didn't. It was not a loud sound that broke the stillness. Not a roar. Not a crash. Just footsteps. Small. Uncertain. Out of place. The Queen's eyes opened slowly, the faint movement alone enough to send a subtle ripple through the air. A shift in presence that would have sent most creatures fleeing before they even understood what they were sensing. But the footsteps did not stop. They hesitated. But they continued. That, more than anything, drew her attention. Her head lifted slightly, her gaze turning toward the source of the sound. And there, at the edge of the blackened clearing, standing just beyond the reach of the shadow she cast, was something so small, so fragile, that for a moment it didn't seem real. A human child. A boy, no older than 10. Thin, dust-covered, his clothes worn from travel, his face marked with exhaustion and something else. Something quieter, something that mirrored the emptiness of the valley itself. He should not have been there. No human should have been. And yet, there he stood, looking at her, not with fear, not with awe, but with something far stranger. Recognition. The Queen studied him in silence, her immense presence pressing outward, filling the space between them. A weight that would have crushed the will of most beings without effort. And still, he did not run. "You are loud," the Queen said at last, her voice low and resonant, carrying through the air like distant thunder. The boy blinked, as if the words themselves had taken a moment to reach him, and then, slowly, he tilted his head. "I didn't say anything," he replied. The Queen's gaze did not shift. "Your sorrow did," she said. That seemed to catch him off guard. Not the fact that she spoke, not even what she was, but the meaning behind her words. For a moment he said nothing, his small hands tightening slightly at his sides, and then, quietly, he stepped forward. One step, then another, closing the distance that should have felt impossible. "You're sad too," he said. It wasn't a question. The Queen did not answer immediately, because no one had ever said that to her before. Not like that, not so simply, not without fear. "Yes," she said finally. The boy nodded, as if that confirmed something he had already known, and then, without asking permission, without hesitation, he sat down on the cold, dark ground, just at the edge of her reach. Not too close, not too far, just there. The Queen watched him, her ancient mind searching for reason, for purpose, for threat. But there was none. Only a child. sitting in a place that had forgotten what it meant to hold life. "You should not be here," she said. The boy shrugged slightly. "There's nowhere else to go," he replied. The simplicity of it struck harder than any defiance could have. The queen's gaze softened, just slightly. "Your kind fears mine," she said. "Most things are gone," the boy answered quietly. "There's not much left to be scared of." Silence followed. But it was no longer empty. The wind moved again, faint, cautious, as if testing whether it was allowed to exist in this place once more. And the boy sat there unmoving, his small presence steady against the vast weight of the queen's grief. After a while, he spoke again. "Did you lose someone too?" The question hung in the air, simple, gentle, and impossibly heavy. The queen closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she answered not as a ruler, not as a survivor, but as something far more fragile. "I lost everything," she whispered. The boy didn't react with shock, didn't pull away, didn't try to fix it. He just nodded. "Me too," he said softly. And in that moment, something changed. Not in the world, not in the past, but in the space between two broken beings who had found, in each other, something they had both thought was gone. Understanding. The queen opened her eyes again, her gaze settling on the small figure beside her. And for the first time since the war had taken everything from her, the silence no longer felt like it was crushing her. Simply was, and for the first time, she was not alone in it. Dragon. The silence that followed their shared confession did not feel as suffocating as it once had, and though the valley remained unchanged, still scarred, still empty, still carrying the weight of everything it had lost, there was now a subtle difference in the air, something so small it could not be seen or measured, yet unmistakable in its presence, because where there had once been only grief, there was now something else layered quietly beneath it, something fragile and unfamiliar, and the dragon. Queen, who had spent years in solitude so complete that even her own thoughts had begun to echo too loudly, found herself aware of another presence in a way that felt grounding. The boy had not moved. He remained seated on the cold ground, his legs pulled slightly inward, his hands resting loosely in his lap, his gaze drifting not toward the queen but across the valley itself, as if he, too, were trying to understand the shape of a place that had lost its meaning. "What happened here?" he asked after a while, his voice quiet but steady, not demanding answers, only seeking them. The queen's gaze followed his, sweeping slowly across the ruined expanse, the shattered remains of stone pillars, the blackened outlines of what had once been nests, the deep scars in the earth where fire and force had torn through everything that had stood. And for a moment, she said nothing, because the answer to that question was not simple, not something that could be contained in a few words, not something she had ever truly spoken aloud before. "War," she said finally. The boy frowned slightly. "Like soldiers." "No," she replied. "Worse." Her voice carried a quiet bitterness, not sharp or explosive, but worn down by time, like something that had been repeated too many times to still hold anger in the same way. And the boy seemed to sense that, because he did not press further immediately, instead letting the silence settle again before asking another question. "Why didn't you leave?" That one lingered longer. The queen's gaze shifted downward, her massive form remaining still as the question settled somewhere deeper than the last, somewhere that brushed against something she had not fully confronted, even after all this time. "This was my home," she said. "My duty was to protect it." The boy tilted his head slightly. "But there's nothing left." The words were not cruel. They were not meant to hurt, but they were honest. And honesty sometimes cut deeper than anything else. The queen did not respond right away, because he was not wrong. There was nothing left, nothing to guard, nothing to rule, nothing to protect. And yet, she had stayed. "I did not know where else to go," she admitted quietly. The boy seemed to consider that, his small brow furrowing slightly as he processed the idea, and then, after a moment, he nodded, as if that answer made sense to him in a way that needed no further explanation. "Me neither," he said. That simple reply carried more weight than it should have. The queen looked at him again, really looked this time, noticing the details she had not focused on before. The way his clothes were worn thin from travel, the dust clinging to his skin, the faint lines of exhaustion beneath his eyes, and something else, something deeper, something that mirrored the emptiness she saw in the valley itself. "How did you come here?" she asked. The boy hesitated, not out of fear, but as if he were deciding how much of the answer to give. "I was with people," he said slowly. "We were moving, trying to find somewhere safe." He paused briefly, his hands tightening just slightly. "But something attacked us." The Queen's expression did not change, but her attention sharpened. "What kind of attack?" she asked. The boy shook his head. "I don't know. It was loud, bright. Everything just broke." His voice grew quieter toward the end. "I got lost." Lost. The word echoed in the Queen's mind in a way that felt far too familiar. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. "And you came here," she said. The boy nodded. "I saw the mountains. I thought maybe something would be here." The Queen glanced around the empty valley again. "And you were not wrong," she said. The boy gave a small, almost hesitant smile at that. "I guess not." Another silence followed, but this one felt lighter than before, less burdened by the weight of everything unsaid, and for a while, they simply existed in that shared space, neither trying to fill it, neither trying to force meaning into it, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension that had once defined the valley began to ease. After some time, the boy shifted slightly, drawing his knees closer as he glanced toward the Queen again. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. The question caught her off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it was precise. "What?" she asked. He gestured vaguely toward her. "Being here, remembering everything." The Queen was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. The boy nodded, as if that answer was exactly what he had expected. "Me too," he replied. Again, there was no attempt to fix it, no attempt to offer comfort in the way most would. Just acknowledgement, and somehow, that was enough. The Queen lowered her head slightly, bringing herself closer to the ground. Not in submission, not in weakness, but in something closer to presence, and the distance between them, once vast and filled with uncertainty, now felt smaller, more manageable, less defined by fear and more by something quieter. "What is your name?" she asked. The boy looked up at her, blinking once as if surprised she had not asked sooner. "Aaron," he said. The Queen repeated it softly, as if testing the sound of it. "Aaron." There was something about speaking a name that changed things, made them real, made them matter. Aaron shifted slightly again, his gaze drifting back toward the valley, but this time, there was a subtle difference in the way he looked at it. Not as something entirely empty, but as something that held possibility, however small. "Can I stay here for a while?" he asked after a moment. The question hung in the air. The Queen could have said no, could have sent him away, told him to find safety elsewhere, told him that this place was not meant for someone like him. But the truth was, there was nowhere else, not for him and perhaps not for her either. She studied him for a long moment, weighing something she had not needed to consider in a very long time. "Choice. You may," she said at last. Aaron didn't react with excitement or relief. He simply nodded. "Okay," he said, and that was enough. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying less weight than before, and as the light shifted slowly across the valley, marking the quiet passage of time, something began to change. Not in a way that erased the past, not in a way that healed everything that had been broken, but in a way that made the present just a little more bearable. The Queen rested her head lower against the ground, her massive form still, her eyes half-lidded as she watched the small human beside her, and for the first time in years, her thoughts were not entirely consumed by what she had lost. Because now, there was something here, small, fragile, unexpected, but real. And as the valley held them both in its quiet embrace, the grief that had once defined it no longer felt quite as endless as it had before. Not gone, but shared. Dragon. The next morning came quietly, almost hesitantly, as if the sun itself was uncertain whether it was still welcome in a place so long defined by shadow and loss, and for the first time in many years, the Dragon Queen did not remain motionless through the passing of night into day, because something had changed. Not in the valley, not in the scars etched into the land, but in the simple fact that when her eyes opened, there was someone else there. A small figure curled against the cold ground, still asleep despite the harshness of the place. His breathing slow and steady in a way that felt almost foreign in such a broken environment. Arin had not left. The queen watched him in silence, her immense head resting low, her gaze softened by a quiet awareness she had not known in years, and for a moment, she simply observed, taking in the small details that might have once seemed insignificant, the way his hands were tucked beneath his cheek, the faint rise and fall of his chest, the subtle tension that remained even in his rest, as if some part of him still expected to wake to danger at any moment. It was familiar. Not the shape, not the form, but the feeling. The memory of what it meant to sleep without safety, without certainty, without peace. Something in her shifted slightly, carefully, so carefully that even the air barely stirred. She adjusted her position, one of her massive wings extending just enough to cast a broader shadow over him, shielding him from the sharp edge of the morning wind that cut across the valley. And though the gesture was small compared to her size, compared to her strength, it carried a weight far greater than anything she had done since the war. Protection. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, but by choice. Time passed slowly after that, the light growing stronger as the sun climbed higher, brushing against the ruins of the valley in a way that revealed every crack, every scar, every memory left behind in the wake of destruction, and eventually, Arin stirred, his body shifting slightly before his eyes opened, blinking against the brightness as he pushed himself up into a sitting position. For a moment he seemed disoriented. Then he remembered. His gaze lifted, finding the queen almost immediately, and though there was a flicker of surprise, perhaps at the realization that she was still there, that he had not imagined it, there was no fear. Only quiet acknowledgement. "You're still here," he said. The queen regarded him steadily. "So are you," she replied. Arin gave a small nod, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand before glancing around the valley again, as if seeing it with slightly different eyes than the day before, and for a while, neither of them spoke, the silence settling comfortably between them, no longer heavy, no longer suffocating, but simply present. Then Arin shifted slightly, pulling his knees closer as he looked down at the ground in front of him, tracing small patterns in the dust with his finger. "I used to have a dog," he said suddenly. The queen's gaze flickered, her attention sharpening slightly at the unexpected statement. "A companion animal?" she asked. Arin nodded. "Yeah. His name was Bryn." A faint smile touched his face, brief but real. "He used to sit next to me like this. Didn't really do anything. Just stayed." The queen was quiet for a moment, considering that. "And that brought you comfort?" she asked. Arin shrugged lightly. "Yeah. It made things feel less empty." The word lingered in the air. Empty. The queen understood that word better than most. Her gaze drifted briefly across the valley again, taking in the vast, hollow space that had once been filled with life, and for the first time, she found herself wondering, not about what had been lost, but about what might still be possible within that emptiness. "Then I will remain," she said quietly. Arin looked up at her, a small flicker of surprise crossing his face before it softened into something else. Something warmer, something that hadn't been there before. "Okay," he said. It was such a simple exchange. And yet, it carried a quiet significance that neither of them fully put into words. As the day stretched on, Arin began to move more, exploring the immediate area with cautious curiosity, never straying too far from where the queen rested, his small figure weaving between the remnants of stone and ash as he searched. Not for anything specific, but perhaps for something useful, something that could give him even the smallest sense of control in a world that had taken so much from him. The queen watched him the entire time, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Every movement, every step, every shift in his posture. And slowly she began to notice patterns, not just in what he did, but in how he did it, the way he avoided certain areas instinctively, the way he flinched slightly at sudden sounds, the way he paused sometimes, as if caught between the present and something he could not quite leave behind. He was not just surviving, he was enduring, and that, in its own way, was strength. Eventually, Arin returned, carrying a small collection of broken fragments. Pieces of stone, bits of charred wood, things that might have once been part of something larger, and he set them down near where he had been sitting before, arranging them slowly, deliberately, as if trying to build something out of what remained. The queen lowered her head slightly, watching with quiet interest. "What are you doing?" she asked. Arin didn't look up immediately. "I don't know," he admitted. "Just making something." The queen considered that. Making something. Out of nothing. Out of ruin. It was a simple act. And yet, felt important. She shifted slightly, her massive claw moving carefully across the ground, selecting a larger piece of stone from the surrounding debris and placing it gently beside his small arrangement. Her movements slow and deliberate to avoid disturbing what he had already done. Arin paused, looking up at her, then at the stone she had added. For a moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, he adjusted its position, integrating it into the structure he was building, as if it had always belonged there. "Thanks," he said. The queen did not respond immediately, but something in her expression softened. The two of them continued like that for a while, one small, one immense, both working in silence, both contributing in their own way to something that had no defined purpose, no clear end goal, but carried meaning all the same. And as the structure slowly took shape, uneven, imperfect, fragile, it stood as something the valley had not seen in a very long time. Creation, not destruction, not loss, but something new. As the sun began to lower once more, casting long shadows across the broken landscape, Arin leaned back slightly, looking at what they had made, and though it was simple, though it was small, there was a quiet satisfaction in his expression. "It's not much," he said. The queen's gaze rested on the structure, then shifted to him. "It is enough," she replied. Arin smiled faintly at that, the expression lingering a little longer this time before fading into something more neutral, more thoughtful, and as the light continued to dim, he shifted closer, just slightly, resting near the edge of her presence once again, not touching, not intruding, but close enough to feel the warmth that radiated from her. A warmth that felt steady, real, and, most importantly, safe. The queen lowered her head once more, her gaze settling on the horizon as the last light of day faded into dusk, and for the first time since the war had taken everything from her, she did not feel like she was simply waiting for time to pass. Because now, there was something here worth staying for. Not a kingdom, not a throne, but a quiet, shared existence that asked for nothing more than presence. And as the stars began to appear overhead, faint but persistent against the darkening sky, the grief that had once defined the valley no longer felt like an endless void, felt like something that could slowly be carried together. Dragon. The nights grew quieter in a different way after that, no longer heavy with the suffocating stillness that had once pressed against every corner of the valley, but softened, subtly, almost imperceptibly, by the simple presence of two beings who no longer faced the darkness alone. And as the days passed, something fragile began to take shape between the Dragon Queen and Arin, something that did not erase the past nor pretend that the world had not been broken, but instead existed alongside it, quietly defiant in its persistence, like a small flame refusing to be extinguished by the vast emptiness surrounding it. Arin began to move through the valley with a little more confidence, his steps still cautious but no longer hesitant, his eyes no longer searching only for danger but beginning, slowly, to notice what remained. Small things at first, the way certain stones still held warmth from the sun, the faint trickle of water that emerged from a crack in the rock far from the queen's resting place, the stubborn patches of dry grass that had somehow survived in the shadow of devastation. And though these discoveries were simple, they carried a quiet importance, because they were signs that the world, even after everything, had not entirely given up. The queen noticed it too, not just the changes in the valley, but the changes in Arin. The way his shoulders seemed a little less tense. The way his voice, when he spoke, carried a little more steadiness. The way he no longer flinched at every distant sound, as if some part of him had begun to believe, however cautiously, that this place, broken as it was, might still offer a kind of safety. And in turn, she changed as well. Not in the way she carried her strength, that remained ancient and immense, but in how she chose to use it, how she positioned herself within the valley, how her awareness extended beyond her own grief to include something else, something smaller but no less significant, and where she had once remained still for days without movement, she now shifted more often, adjusting her position to follow the arc of the sun, to shield Aaron from harsh winds, to remain near enough that he never felt alone. Even when he wandered slightly farther than before, it was not spoken, but it was understood. Days turned into something resembling routine. In the mornings, Aaron would explore, gathering small fragments of the valley. Stones, pieces of wood, anything that could be shaped or used, while the queen watched, her gaze steady, her presence a constant anchor, and in the afternoons, they would sit together near the small structure they had built, adding to it little by little, turning it into something more stable, more deliberate, as if they were both, in their own way, trying to prove that creation could still exist in a place defined by destruction. And in the evenings, they would simply exist, together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with quiet conversation that carried no urgency, no expectation, only the simple act of sharing space and time. And it was during one of those evenings, as the sky shifted into deeper shades of blue and the first stars began to appear, that Aaron spoke again, not with the same cautious tone he had used before, but with something a little more certain. "Are you still a queen?" he asked. The question lingered in the air, not heavy, not sharp, but thoughtful in a way that reached deeper than it first appeared. The Dragon Queen did not answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the last traces of light were fading, and for a moment, she considered the question. Not just the words, but what they meant, what they implied, what they asked of her beyond a simple answer. "There is no kingdom," she said at last. "No subjects. No throne." Aaron nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that truth. "But you're still you," he said. That made her pause. Not because it was complicated, but because it was simple. And sometimes, simplicity revealed things that complexity could not. "Yes," she said quietly. Aaron looked at her then, his small face lit faintly by the soft glow of the fading light. "Then maybe that's enough," he said. The words settled into the space between them, quiet but firm, and for a long moment, the queen said nothing, her ancient mind turning them over, examining them from angles she had not considered before, and slowly, very slowly, something in her understanding began to shift. Perhaps a title was not defined by what had been lost. Perhaps it was defined by what remained, and what she chose to do with it. Her gaze lowered slightly, settling on Aaron, and in that moment, she realized something that had not been clear to her before. Not during the war, not during her solitude, not even in the first days after his arrival. She was not simply a survivor, and she was not simply alone. Not anymore. "Then I will remain as I am," she said. Aaron smiled faintly at that, the expression small but genuine, and though he did not say anything further, the meaning was clear. That was enough. The wind moved gently across the valley, no longer harsh, no longer cutting, but carrying a softer edge, as if the land itself had begun to accept the change that had taken place within it. And as the stars spread across the sky, bright and steady against the darkness, the queen shifted slightly, lowering her head closer to the ground once more, her presence calm, steady, no longer defined solely by loss. Aaron leaned back against the stone structure they had built together. His small form relaxed in a way it had not been when he first arrived, his gaze drifting upward to the sky, and for a while, neither of them spoke, the silence settling around them like something gentle instead of oppressive. After some time, Aaron yawned softly, his body beginning to tire from the day, and without hesitation, without uncertainty, he shifted closer. Just slightly, resting near the edge of the queen's presence, close enough to feel the warmth that radiated from her, the steady, reassuring heat that spoke of strength, of life, of something enduring. "Good night," he murmured quietly. The queen watched him for a moment as his eyes slowly closed, his breathing evening out as sleep took him, and for a long time she remained still, her gaze moving from the small figure beside her to the valley beyond, to the sky above, to the world that had once been filled with loss and now held something else alongside it. Not hope, not yet, not fully, but something close, something that could grow into it. Carefully, she extended her wing once more, shielding him from the night air, her movement slow and deliberate, protective without being overwhelming, and as she settled into stillness again, her mind did not drift immediately into memories of the past, into the echoes of everything she had lost. Instead, she remained present, aware, grounded in the quiet reality of what existed now. A boy who had found his way into a place that had forgotten life. A queen who had believed herself to be the last of something that no longer mattered. And between them, a fragile, growing understanding that even in a world shaped by destruction, even in a place defined by grief, peace, however small, however fleeting, could still exist. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the Dragon Queen did not feel the weight of the night pressing down upon her. She simply watched over it. Dragon,